In December 2023, a devastating act of domestic violence shattered a family home in northwest Las Vegas, Nevada. The victims were 34-year-old mother Schinara Patterson, her 14-year-old stepdaughter Keziah Cohn, and her 6-year-old daughter Zi'Myra Patterson. All three lost their lives inside the apartment they shared. Schinara's 11-year-old son, Derek, was also shot but survived and remains in critical condition, while her youngest child was spared only because they were not at home at the time. The tragedy was carried out by someone Schinara once trusted most, her own husband, who turned violent after a series of troubling criminal charges and personal struggles. Police involvement began when a worried family member went to check on Schinara and discovered the horrific scene. A frantic 911 call soon followed, bringing officers from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department to the home, where they confirmed multiple victims suffering from gunshot wounds. What unfolded that night left not just the family, but an entire community reeling with grief and unanswered questions about how such a tragedy could have been prevented. This is Schinara Patterson's story. Schinara Patterson was just 34 years old, a vibrant woman, a mother, a daughter, and a friend to many. She had built a life filled with joy, hard work, and resilience. Born in Los Angeles, she was known for her warm personality and her ability to make others smile. She was deeply loved by her family and adored by her children, who were the center of her world. Schinara was also a dreamer and a doer. She owned her own salon, Talented Hands, where she braided hair with passion and precision. She worked hard to provide for her 4 children, Keziah, Zi'Myra, Derek, and Marvin Jr., making sure they felt loved, celebrated, and supported. On birthdays, she would fill their day with laughter, singing joyfully to them, making each moment unforgettable. But behind the scenes, Schinara lived in a dangerous reality. The man she once believed would love and protect her, her husband, Marvin Patterson, became the source of fear and abuse. He controlled her, isolated her from loved ones, and threatened her life. Yet, like many women in abusive relationships, she stayed, hoping to shield her children, holding on to loyalty, and believing love could conquer fear. When Marvin was arrested on horrific charges involving children, Schinara stood by him. She fought to bond him out of jail, thinking she was protecting her family, but her kindness and loyalty were ultimately used against her. Friends urged her to leave, warning her of the danger. But Schinara's heart was big, too big to give up on someone she once loved. On December 11, 2023, that loyalty cost her everything. Marvin, spiraling under personal troubles and the weight of his pending trial, turned his rage toward the people who loved him most. Schinara, her 14-year-old stepdaughter Keziah, and her 6-year-old daughter Zi'Myra were shot and killed inside their home. Her 11-year-old son Derek was critically wounded, but miraculously survived. Only her youngest child was spared, simply because they were not at home that night. The discovery was devastating. Schinara's brother, worried after not hearing from her, walked into a nightmare. His sister and nieces gone, his nephew fighting for life. The 911 calls echoed grief, confusion, and disbelief. At a vigil, her mother, Zi'Myra, wept for her daughter and grandchildren. This was not supposed to happen, she said, voicing the heartbreak of a family that lost not just one loved one, but nearly an entire generation in a single act of violence. Keziah was remembered as a funny and creative teenager who loved to draw. Zi'Myra was described as pure innocence, the sweetest child you could ever meet. Schinara herself was celebrated as a woman who always gave, always loved, and always showed up for others. This tragedy has left her family and community not only mourning, but also demanding accountability. Marvin should never have been released on reduced bail while facing such serious charges. Advocates call it a failure of the system, one that cost Schinara and her children their lives. Schinara Patterson and her babies will be remembered not for the violence that ended their lives, but for the love, joy, and light they brought into the world. Their story is a reminder of how dangerous cycles of abuse can be and how the system must do better to protect victims before it is too late. May Schinara, Keziah, and Zi'Myra rest in peace. And may Derek continue to fight, carrying forward the love his mother poured into him every day of his young life. Analysis of the case. The murder of Schinara Patterson and her children is a heartbreaking example of how cycles of abuse, systemic failures, and misplaced trust can converge into a deadly outcome. 1. Domestic violence and control. Schinara's marriage was marked by control and abuse. Despite public appearances of happiness, she endured physical violence, threats, and isolation at the hands of her husband. Like many survivors of abuse, she chose to stay, partly out of love, partly out of fear, and mostly for the sake of her children. Her loyalty, which should have been her strength, was tragically exploited. 2. Systemic failure in bail decisions. The killer was facing 9 felony charges, including sexual assault of minors and lewdness with children under 14. Initially held on a $100,000 bond, his bail was later reduced to $10,000, despite the severity of his crimes. This decision allowed him to return home, where he ultimately carried out the murders. The judicial system failed to weigh the risk he posed not only to the public, but especially to his own family. 3. Warning signs ignored. Marvin had a documented history of violence, threats, and disturbing behavior. Friends and family urged Schinara to leave, and he had even faced accusations of harming children. Yet intervention came too late. The red flags were visible, but the structures in place to protect Schinara and her kids fell short. 4. The human cost. At the center of this tragedy are the victims. Schinara Patterson, 34, a hardworking mother, entrepreneur, and loving parent. Keziah Cohn, 14, a bright teenager who loved to draw and had a goofy sense of humor. Zi'Myra Patterson, 6, remembered as innocent, sweet, and full of life. Derek, 11, a survivor, left critically injured, carrying the trauma of losing his mother and sisters. Their deaths highlight how domestic violence doesn't just destroy individuals, it tears apart families and leaves surviving loved ones with lifelong scars. Police and community response. Police were alerted only after the tragedy had already unfolded, when Schinara's brother went for a welfare check and found the horrific scene. By then, it was too late. The community responded with grief and outrage, questioning how such a dangerous man could be granted freedom while awaiting trial. Vigils were held in memory of Schinara and her children, but many called for accountability from the courts and for better protections for women and children at risk. This case is a chilling reminder of the dangers victims face when abusers are not held accountable. It also underscores the urgent need for reform in bail decisions, stronger protections for survivors of domestic abuse, and greater community awareness. Schinara and her children should be remembered not for how they died, but for the love, joy, and potential that was stolen from them.